Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Dear students, the topic on consumer and producer surplus was in discussion. I have already explained you the concept of consumer and producer surplus. Now, let you know how to calculate these two surpluses, consumer surplus and producer surplus. For this, you should know demand function and supply function, and at the point where both the functions are equal to each other, or at the point where demand curve intersect the supply curve, equilibrium level of price is determined, and that equilibrium level of price and quantity is known as market price and market demand. And by solving these two functions or equating these two functions, we can estimate the quantity Q and market price, and then on the basis of these two estimates we can know consumer surplus. Let me take an example to explain you the consumer surplus. We have inverse demand function and inverse supply function. P is equal to 100 minus 0.25 Q. So, this is our demand function. Now, from this you can also know the slope of the demand curve. When you have a linear demand curve, if you differentiate this function del P divided by del Q, then you will get 0.25 minus 0.25, that is called slope of the demand curve. Since there is a minus sign, so the demand curve is having a negative slope, indicating the inverse relationship between the price of the product and quantity demanded. This price function can also be converted into demand function. So, this P is price function, which is called inverse demand function, can be converted into demand function, and now we have QD equal to 400 minus 4P, so 4P, that is the demand function. Similarly, we also have the supply function P equal to 20 plus 0.55 Q, and here you can also know the supply slope of the supply curve. If you differentiate this function with respect to Q, then this partial slope is known as supply curve, and this is constant, indicating that there should be a minimum price which is necessary for a producer to supply the goods in the market, and that minimum price actually depend upon the fixed cost. So, if the price is not recovering this kind of fixed or variable cost, etc., then the producer would not be able to supply the product in the market. Now, you can also convert this function into supply function, and that is 36.36 plus 1.82 P is the supply function, and we can estimate the equilibrium level of price and quantity by using both the functions. Either you can take price function, or you can take demand function and supply function to calculate the equilibrium level of price. So, here this is where Q you can say the demand function and supply functions are equated. So, 100 minus 0.25 this is Q here missing. So, minus 100 minus 0.25 Q equal to 20 plus 0.55 Q. Now, you can further simplify it, then you will get 0.8 Q equal to 80, and Q is 80 divided by 0.8 and that becomes 100. So, 100 is the equilibrium level of quantity, and by putting value of Q into the function you can also get market price. So, 100 if you take this price function or either this QD function, for example, QD is 400 minus 4 phi, and if you put this 75, P is a 75. So, 4 multiplied by 75 and here 400 minus 4 into 75, then you will get the price this or 4 P equal to you can see from this P equal to 100 minus 0.25, and since Q is here 100. So, 0.25 multiplied by 100 is 75. So, P is 75 this. So, 100 minus 0.25 into 100 equal to 75. So, here we had two values, one is equilibrium quantity Q is equal to 100 and P is equal to 75. Now, you can also know at what price the quantity is 0. QD is equal to 400 minus 4 P. So, if price is 100, then minus 4 multiplied by 100 minus 400. So, 400 minus 400 QD becomes 0. So, maximum price at which the consumer is not willing to purchase any quantity is 100. Now, you know the market price 75, you know the equilibrium level of quantity 100, you know the maximum price the consumer is willing to pay, then you can easily calculate the consumer surplus, and the formula of consumer surplus is 1 by 2 base into height. So, 1 by 2 means 0.5 is our this 1.5 1 by 2 equal to 0.5. So, 0.5 multiplied by 100, then 100 minus 75 equal to 1250. So, consumer surplus here is 1250. Similarly, you can also calculate producer surplus, and producer surplus is 0.5 multiplied by base, that is equilibrium level of quantity 100, then the difference between the minimum price which the producer is willing to accept for a particular first unit or 0 unit you can say, then and the equilibrium level of price. So, 75 minus 20 equal to 2750. So, this is our producer's surplus. Now, this can easily be known. You can see in this graph, or I can simply use it. How much is the 100 or let me check how much. Yes, this is the 100 is the maximum price and equilibrium level of price. Okay. So, here Q is 100, P is 75 and maximum price is 100. So, this is 100 and Q is 100, P is 75. Now, you can easily calculate. So, consumer surplus and producer surplus. So, this is our consumer surplus and that is producer's surplus. Now, one important aspect here is that if there is a change in the price of the product, as we assume that price is given, but if there is a change in the price of the product, then the welfare of the consumer will be affected positively or negatively depending upon how the price is changing. Take the demand curve. This is our linear demand curve AB. Price is taken on vertical axis and quantity is taken on horizontal axis. This is our initial price, say OP, and quantity is OQ, and this is our consumer surplus. So, PAC, this is our consumer surplus. Now, if the market price increases, if price increases and this P0 becomes P1 and P1 is greater than P0, then what happens? Price will go up and quantity demanded goes down, but at the same time this area of consumer surplus also declines, and this is the reason why the common masses always worried about rising prices of various commodities. So, when the price of various commodities increases in the market, welfare of the consumer also falls. That is why when there is a high rate of inflation in any country and especially for the essential commodities, people start agitating against the rising prices because it erodes the welfare of the consumer. So, very important that how the price of the product is moving, whether price is declining or going up, that will also affect the consumer surplus. But at the same time you can also see how the price change affected the producer's surplus. You can take, if this is the supply curve and this is the point where the producer is not willing to supply any commodity, say A point, and if market price is OP 0, quantity supplied is 0, and now this area is producer's surplus. Now, if market price increases, then quantity supplied also increases and producer surplus now becomes larger. So, obviously the producer would like to have higher price of their product because it will increase their producer surplus, and consumer would like to pay less price of the product because if consumer is going to pay less price, it will increase their consumer surplus. Now, application in environmental economics of these concepts, the conventional economic model do not account for externalities. I already explained what is externality. Externality is unintentional harm or benefit received by a person not directly involved in the activities. So, according to economist, economic efficiency occurs at the equilibrium where private cost, which include capital cost, labor cost, raw material, etc., representing the supply curve equal the private benefits representing the demand curve, as I already discussed that price of the product and economic efficiency achieved at the point where supply and demand curve of a firm intersect each others. But here the supply curve or marginal cost includes only the private expenses involved to produce the goods, not the external cost of the production. However, environmental economists reject it and claim that economic activities have some unintended cost or benefit, ignoring them to the supply and demand function and would lead to economic inefficiency. So, market distortion actually occurs because of presence of externalities. So, externality is very important, because if you are not internalizing the externality, then the society will bear the cost of the production of goods which do not include the external cost like pollution, while estimating the cost and benefits of a particular activity. Internalization of negative externalities. How can we internalize the externality? We can simply explain by a graph. For example, we take a case of any industry. You can take any example. Most polluted industries like cement, steel, paper. So, you can take say paper industry, and paper industry is producing paper and having a supply curve like this SS and demand curve like this DD. So, DD is our marginal willingness to pay, and this is, or that is also called marginal private benefit, and that is also called marginal private cost, and this is equilibrium output OQ, and OP is the price. Now, this supply curve does not include external cost. Now, how you take this external cost, whether you take it as a per unit increase or lump sum, that will tell us what will be the shape of this marginal social cost. So, marginal social cost is marginal private benefit plus marginal external cost, and since we are taking marginal, and it may increase or decrease depending upon, or it may be a constant, then a constant will be added, or it may have a slope, then curve may be like this. Okay. So, this is marginal social cost, and now the new equilibrium is achieved at point E1, earlier it was E0, and quantity demanded is OQ1 from OQ0. So, this is a new equilibrium that you can say when, or socially desirable equilibrium point, because now the external cost is included in the function, and now the price will go up. So, now when you look at the consumer surplus, of course, since here consumer surplus is the difference between what the consumer is willing to pay and what the consumer actually paying. Now, consumer is actually paying higher, so consumer surplus also decline due to this, but society is going to gain because of this, because when the polluted industry is reducing the output, So, when output is reduced, then marginal external cost or total external cost will also reduce. So, pollution will also reduce when output is reduced, and in that case the welfare of the society at large will increase. So, here it is very important how you internalize the externality. There may be various methods to internalize the externality. One is that polluters pay principle is followed by many countries including India. Indian environmental policy also focuses that if polluter is polluting, then the entire cost of the pollution should be recovered by the government from the polluters. So, polluters must put that cost into the entire production system. So, if it is taken into the system, then the supply curve will shift upward, and new supply curve S1 will be, that is called marginal social cost curve, and new equilibrium will be achieved at higher level of price and lower level of quantity. So, that obviously will also reduce the producers surplus as well as the consumer surplus, but at the same time society at large would be benefited because of this. So, this is one way. Second way may be that we can impose pollution tax. Pollution tax, and many times government also make provision in the budget that some additional cess can be imposed on motor vehicles or other areas in order to recover the cost of the pollution that is generated by either consumer when consumer is polluting the environment while consuming the product, or producers when producer is polluting the environment. So, pollution tax can be imposed, but more or less the effect would be same. When a tax is imposed, then the supply curve will shift upward. You can easily see the similar kind of graph. Suppose this is the situation before tax. If you take impose a tax on paper industry or automobile industries or sugar industry etc., then we have a supply curve, demand curve. This is our demand curve, this is our supply curve, and now this is Q, and then the S1 will be higher, and that indicate tax. So, tax also discourage the production of polluted industries from Q0 to Q1, market price from P1 to P2. So, ultimately whether polluters is internalizing the externality by treating the waste before releasing into the atmosphere, or government is imposing the tax on the polluters, ultimately the burden would be on consumers. So, all these taxes are passed on to the consumer by raising the price, but as the student of economics we know how much tax will be passed on to the consumer, how much will be borne by the producer, that actually depend upon the elasticity of demand. Elasticity of demand. So, if elasticity of demand is less elastic of a particular product, and if tax is imposed on the pollution tax is imposed on such product, that then the maximum burden would be on consumers, whereas consumer demand will not decline due to the increase in, or decline in a lesser magnitude when the price is increased due to the increase in taxes. But if elasticity of demand is more elastic, then what happen if the company will try to shift the pollution tax on the consumers by raising the price, then demand will come down drastically. When demand comes down, it will also affect the revenue position of the company. So, company may bear a part of such tax itself and partially can be shifted to the consumers. So, but immediate effect of taxes is that it will improve the welfare of the societies, because by imposing pollution tax we can discourage the production of polluted products or those who pollute the environment. And what will be the results? If more tax are imposed on the product of the polluted industries, then what happens? They will go for R&D, research and development activities. They would try to release less pollution per unit of output produced, and that will help the society at large. So, that is why sometimes we say that this market based approach of environmental protection is more effective, because it encourages the R&D, research and development activities, if we are imposing taxes per unit of pollution generated. So, if pollution is generated and if we impose a unit tax, per unit tax on the emission generated, obviously when a company is releasing more waste, then more tax will be paid, pollution tax will be paid by the company, and next time the company would like to evolve some strategy to reduce the emission per unit of output produced. And obviously if this kind of strategy is adopted by the company, then it will benefit the society. So, welfare of the society will improve due to imposition of pollution tax. So, that is what you can see from these graphs, like the same thing which I already explained you. We have a demand curve, we have a supply curve. Market equilibrium is achieved at the point where supply and demand curve intersect each other, and market price is OP1. Now, if we wanted to include the marginal external cost or externalities included, then the supply curve will shift from this private cost to new supply curve, which is also known as marginal social cost. And marginal social cost intersect the marginal benefit curve at point E1. So, movement from E to E1 is at higher level of price and lower level of quantity. So, obviously that reduces the pollution in the economy. Similarly, you can, I already explained you, when you impose the tax, then tax will also shift the supply curve, and the if tax is imposed, the company will set the price at higher level. So, imposition of tax on industry also shift the supply curve, and supply curve shift and intersecting the existing demand curve at point E1, which is showing lower level of output and higher level of price, indicating that now when pollution tax is imposed, then company output will be reduced, and if output is reduced, and since company are generating externality pollution, so if output is reduced, pollution will also reduce and welfare of the consumer will increase. Similarly, it is very interesting that in some cases positive externality is also generated. As in the earlier lecture, I discussed that whether externality is negative or positive, both distort the market. So, market efficiency is affected due to the presence of both positive or negative externalities, but positive externality is desirable because it benefits the entire society, like education, for example. In case if more expenditure is made on education and people are becoming more and more educated, then the educated people also generate positive externalities, and that will help the society. So, if a society is spending more money on providing education, and if people are getting education, then its benefit goes to the entire people through positive externality. Similarly, another good example of positive externality is a beekeeping and apple orchard. So, farmers, there may be two farmers, one is growing apple, other is growing honey. So, both generate positive externalities. Beekeeping, people, the bees get nectar from the garden, and bees also help in pollination. So, the productivity of the farmer growing apple will increase due to the pollination, and similarly productivity of the farmer growing honey will also increase, but it is not the intention of honey grower or apple grower to provide benefit to each other. So, it is unintentional benefit, but society is getting or farmers are getting benefit in the form of positive externality. So, there are number of such example of positive externalities. A private park can be constructed by a person for his or her own benefit, but people walking near to that park may also enjoy the natural beauty of the park, and they also extract utility. So, that is a kind of positive externality. Similarly, there are number of examples like farmers may grow tree and they earn income by growing tree, but at the same time the carbon sequestration occurs due to the plantation of tree like popular trees, wood farming is done by the farmers. So, that also improve generate positive externalities. So, there are number of examples of the positive externalities, and when positive externalities is created, it improves the welfare of the society. So, in this example, in this graph, you can easily see that we have marginal private cost and with subsidy, without subsidy. Now, initially we can see that the optimum level of output is achieved at the point where the demand curve is intersecting the supply curve, and this is the point here, and at this point you know that quantity is determined and market price is determined. But in this example a positive externality is generated, and so marginal private benefit, and this is say marginal private benefit, but this is marginal social benefit, which also includes marginal private benefit plus positive externality. So, due to positive externality, now what happens, the equilibrium shift at this point. So, that is called socially optimum point, but when subsidy is included, then again the supply curve will shift, and subsidy, as we know, when a subsidy is given to any factors of production or to any producer, then subsidy encourages the production, tax discourages the production. So, in the preceding example, I explain you how the pollution tax reduces the output, just opposite to the effect of subsidy. So, when subsidy is given to any producer, then it will increase the production, and that can be seen here, this point. So, this point is when the subsidy is given, and especially subsidy may be given by the government to promote the green products like to generate social welfare in the economy. So, like government can provide subsidy on organic farming, and if organic farming is provided subsidy, it will generate positive externality, and positive externality will shift the private marginal benefit to private social benefit, and then it will go to this point which shows higher level of. So, okay. So, now it will improve the welfare of the society by generating the positive externality. You can also know the welfare of the society without externality. So, if externality is not created, or we can say this in two way. First, that any economic activity is not generating any negative externality, or there may be some economic activity which internalize the externality. So, if no externality is generated, then supply and demand curve without externality will intersect each other at the point, this point where equilibrium is achieved, and at this point you can see consumer surplus, producer surplus, total cost and net social loss to the society. So, A part, this A part shows, as we already discussed, consumer surplus. B part is indicating producer surplus. C part shows how much is the cost of producing the quantity when OQ quantity is produced, OQ 0, then this total area is known as total cost. But if company increases the output above the equilibrium level of output, that is OQ is the equilibrium level of output. So, if company is producing above this and produces OQ2, then what will happen? There is a gap. You can see the gap between supply and demand, and that this gap also clearly indicate D part. So, D part is the net social loss due to the overproduction of the product. Similarly, if you produce at OQ1 which is below the equilibrium point, again you can see there is a gap. Here the gap between the marginal willingness to pay for the price and marginal willingness to accept. So, obviously, this gap also create losses. So, losses occurs, the loss of the consumer surplus as well as producer surplus occurs when you deviate from the equilibrium point, either you produce OQ2 or OQ1. In both way there is a loss to the society in terms of loss of the consumer surplus or welfare. Now, total welfare with externality, again as we have already discussed this, when externality is taken into account or when externality is internalized, then the supply curve will shift upward and new supply curve will be supply curve which also include external cost, or as we use marginal private cost and marginal social cost. So, marginal private cost is intersecting marginal private benefit at this point. So, equilibrium is at OQ level of output, but when external cost is added in marginal private cost, then we get marginal social cost, and marginal social cost intersect the existing demand curve or marginal private benefit curve at this point, and now price is higher and quantity is lower. You can see quantity declining and price is going up, and that is also affecting the consumer surplus, but at the same time the net the gain of the society is achieved. Okay, so that is all about consumer surplus and producer surplus. Let me briefly conclude what I have discussed in this lecture. I explain you the two concepts, consumer surplus and producer surplus. I also explain how to estimate or how to calculate the consumer surplus and producer surplus by using the linear demand function. I also explain how to introduce these two concepts in environmental economics or assessing the welfare of the people in case of consumption of various kinds of environmental goods or bads. Thank you very much.